All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Are you up and running? Okay. The next panel, and thank you all for being here, we're going to talk about who pays for pipeline safety and who should. There are a wide range of opinions on several aspects of this. So today with us we have Graham Hill, who's representing INGA today. I'm not going to give long introductions. The bios are in your packet. Mr. Hill's representing INGA. Also with us is Monique Watson, Deputy Director of the Division of Pipeline Regulation with FERC. She's going to talk about the new policy that FERC issued. It's getting really bright. Okay. That FERC issued allowing for cost recovery methods available to gas pipeline operators in certain circumstances, and she's going to talk about that policy and what those circumstances might be. Christina Sames with AGA is going to speak to some of the same things that Mr. Hill does from the perspective of distribution operators. And with that, I think I'm just going to turn it over to Graham, and we're just going to hand.
Thanks very much. Is that a good audio there? Wow, that's a sensitive microphone. I'll hold this down. First off, thanks very much for hosting this. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this panel for weeks, particularly since it's in New Orleans, because I used to live here, and it's great to be back home for a couple of hours at least. As you said, my name is Graham Hill. I'm here representing INGA to discuss the issue of the fee structure for PHMSA. Let me first start by saying that when we're talking about safety and funding, the first line of funding for safety are the expenses that the operators pay to build and maintain these systems and these facilities. And those amounts are measured not in millions of dollars, but in billions of dollars. You can't and you don't inspect safety into a facility. That's an old mantra. Chad and I were talking about that here at lunch. And it's helpful and important to remember that there's huge sums of money and a lot of people focused on safety, and then the inspectors come to ensure what's occurring there. So the money that we're going to talk about here in a second is the inspection part of this, not the safety part. Safety is what industry does. My expectation is that sometime in the spring, when the INGA Foundation issues its infrastructure forecast for the next 20 to 30 years, we're going to see a new portion of that that includes the amounts that industry is spending on maintenance and what those maintenance costs are over the life of the study. And I think you're going to see large numbers there. And the operators, this is money that we're happy to spend. You have to spend that to keep these systems working. That's how operations work. The fee regime at PHMSA was established in 1986 at the famous Andrews Air Force Base Summit, where Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and others were dealing with a big shortfall, but they couldn't raise taxes. That summit gave birth to fees, a huge number of fees in all parts of the federal government, one of which was memorialized in Section 6301, Chapter 60 of Title 49, which is the governing authority for now PHMSA. Back in 1986, the regulated community for which the fee was to be assessed was pretty straightforward. You had hazardous liquid operators, transmission operators, and the future liquefied natural gas. The fee at that time matched the regulated community. Since 1986, Congress has passed a series of reauthorizations of the law. The job there, the goal is to update the authority at what was RISPA up until 2004, Research and Special Programs Administration. That's where the Office of Pipeline Safety was for almost 30 years, with meritorious programming designed to improve the scrutiny of the safety that operators are responsible for. And as the sector and the industries have become more sophisticated, our energy infrastructure became more sophisticated, so too has the programming that was endowed into PHMSA or RISPA by Congress. And over the years, that created a gap between the regulated community as it grew and the fee regime that was established in 1986. This doesn't have to do with how much money PHMSA gets to pay. Congress sets that in the authorization levels that occur in the multi-year pipeline bills, and then each year the appropriators come in and provide an advanced appropriation collection authority, and PHMSA collects those fees, they deposit them, and then they spend them according to the directions from Congress. So what's happened over the years is that the regulated community has grown in size, but the fee has stayed where it was in 1986 with the 1986 regulated community in mind. So who cares, right? Why should we care about that? Do we have, are these programs being funded successfully? One metric for are they being funded successfully is the regime operating as intended. What we want, I think what everybody in this room wants, is for PHMSA to get a stable, reliable amount of funding year over year, the correct amount to pay for its activities, inspection activities, state grants, we all know what's there. Under the current regime, the fees collected don't get deposited into the general fund, into the U.S. Treasury. They get held aside, and PHMSA spends those directly on its expenses based on annual appropriation authority. That's a great situation. Great situation. We don't have to each year compete for the funding that PHMSA gets with low-income housing grants or widows and infant children or any one of a whole series of people that need funding and are seeking funding from what we call the 302B allocations, the annual discretionary amounts that Congress allocates for the entire programming of the budget. We don't want to be in that fight. We want to stay where we are, where we're fee-driven, we're off what we call off-budget, and then PHMSA has a predictable way forward. What Inga is concerned about are developments and scrutiny of the gap between our fee, which was set in 1986, and the continued enlargement of the regulated community. Now, I want to be clear, enlarging the regulated community is not a bad thing. It's happening based on meritorious considerations of you all in this room, of industry, and the committees in Congress that review this. What's important, though, is that as that regime enlarges, and we may add gathering to this, we may add underground geologic depleted formations for gas storage that need safety regulation, that's meritorious. The issue is when we add that, we are starting to stress that fee regime, and that can have consequences that we don't want to see, and I'm going to explain those to you real quick. So in the 2016 THUD report out of the Senate. In fact, we just passed THUD about an hour ago on the Senate floor, for those of you watching this. THUD is the annual appropriation that includes our activities at PHMSA. So it's all transportation, highways, aviation, but also housing and urban development. So the geeks in the room, I guess I'm one, we call it THUD, Transportation, Housing, Urban Development. But our funding authority, in PHMSA's case, the authority to collect this and then expend it is in that bill. That passed the Senate with some problems that were unrelated to us here just in the last hour. But in the report accompanying that, that bill, I'm going to read this to you. And this is in the PHMSA section. Pipeline safety user fee allocation. The pipeline safety program is largely funded through user fees on natural gas transmission pipelines, jurisdictional hazardous liquid pipelines, and liquid natural gas terminal operators. Recent authorizations have increased the responsibilities for PHMSA and the states with respect to the safety of our nation's pipelines. Given this change in scope of the pipeline safety program, the committee directs PHMSA to review the user fee collection process to determine if it should be modified to more equitably allocate the cost of the pipeline safety program across the industry segments covered by federal and state oversight. PHMSA shall submit a report to the House and Senate committees within 60 days that summarizes the agency's statutory authority to revise the fee structure, its assessment of the current fee structure, and any recommendation for changes to the fee structure. I'm going to read one other thing real quick, and then we're going to talk. In the FY16 budget resolution. If I can find that section here. The budget policy for governing FY16 states the following. Policy statement on agency fees and spending. A number of federal agencies and organizations have permanent authority to collect fees and other offsetting collections and to spend these collected funds. The total amount of offsetting fees and offsetting collections, PHMSA is one of these, on an annual basis estimated by OMB is $525 billion. 1/6 of the entire amount of what you normally hear discussed as our annual appropriation is actually not in that number. It's an additive $500 billion on top of it in the form of fees. Agency budget justifications in some cases are not fully transparent about the amount of program activity funded through offsetting collections of fees. This lack of transparency prevents effective and accountable government. And I'll skip forward that what the Budget Committee says is that they want, going forward, a new policy to be established that requires the authorizing committees, these are the committees that write the policy for PHMSA, to begin an annual allocation of budget authority from the originating committee for the fees. What does all that mean? It means that Congress, not INGA, not a stakeholder, not a company, not the Pipeline Safety Trust, but folks within Congress, within committees of jurisdiction, have become aware that there is a gap between the fee and the regulated community. Well, why do they care about that? Why do the appropriators care about that? Well, right now, the way our system works, our fee system, the appropriators who are given a finite amount of discretionary money, that means the money they get to decide how to spend it each year, don't have to spend any of that on PHMSA because we're paid for with fees. So let's imagine that THUD appropriators have $100 they're given every year. Well, there's at least $300 in demands. They don't want to add $302 to that because our fee structure begins to fail the test of a user fee. So let me explain what that means. A user fee is actually not a defined term in the law as crisply as you would expect. Or maybe if you're familiar with Washington, you're not surprised that it's kind of a murky nightmare. There is current law authority that governs the definition in OMB Circular A11 and the A25 revised circular. And the definition there of a user fee, what they call a user charge, is a requirement that the fee be collected and authorized in the statute to be collected and then spent only on those from whom it's collected. Now, why do we care about that? The appropriations language I just read you and the Budget Committee language I just led you, with further the erosion of time and more scrutiny, there's the potential that the gap that exists now between our fee that was set in '86 and the regulated communities exist today, and is going to get enlarged again, by the way, here in just about a month or two, whenever we get this reauthorization done, is going to become so large that it fails the user fee test. What happens then? Well, anybody in here know anything about the gas tax? You all pay it when you buy gasoline, right? Goes into a trust fund, doesn't it? Yeah. Is that a user fee? You pay for it to drive on the roads, right? Or is it an excise tax? It's an excise tax. Why? It's an excise tax because the beneficiaries of it, like transit, are not the payers of the fee. So that money gets deposited in the U.S. Treasury, and only because there's current law that requires Treasury to then to deposit into the Highway Trust Fund, which is just an account at the Treasury Department, do any of that money flow back. That's an excise tax. We don't want to be an excise tax. We want to stay a user fee. User fees stay in the jurisdictional authority of the authorizing committees, and they're not deposited in the Treasury. Money like your income tax that's deposited in the Treasury gets sent back to Congress each year for non-defense discretionary in our case, and the appropriators decide where it goes. They have all these folks saying, I need some, and they have to settle all those fights each year. What we don't want to see, what nobody in here wants to see, is that the nexus between the regulated community and the fee grows so large that it is scored no longer as a fee, but as an excise tax. And that money ends up going into the Treasury, and then each year, instead of having an amount we know that's going to be there, a baseline as we call it, that we can put together each year, we've got to go in and there's going to be a political argument about, well, how much should we spend on this or that or this new thing? And the merits of what's being spent there, instead of being deliberated in the calmness of an authorizing process, can be politicized. And there's going to be other people competing for that funding. At a strategic level, that's our concern. It's not how much money we're giving to PHMSA. The amount of money that's been given to PHMSA each year for these programs is entirely meritorious. We support that. We want it to be stable. If we don't have a stable regulator, none of us have a stable regime. If our regulator is having to fight over discretionary annual appropriations, that's bad. And we're going to do everything we can do to prevent that. But we all, from our point of view, everybody that wants to see PHMSA be a stable regulator over the next 20 years should be concerned with what the Appropriations Committee and the Budget Committee are starting to discuss with specific scrutiny on PHMSA and the alignment of that fee. So I'm going to leave that there at a high level. I think I've probably used up too much time, or at least enough. I'm happy to answer more detailed questions and go as deep as y'all want, explaining some of what I've discussed if it's been kind of too geeky. But otherwise, I'm going to pass it to my esteemed colleagues and take questions later.